Anyway, alright, let's get started with this. This class I called Forgetting the Pencil. And what I want to get at here is a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of tools that we can use, a little bit of approach, a little bit of a lot of things that I think about and have been thinking about since I first started using Sketch Club. Now this is something that I have personally experienced and which I have noticed many other people going through the same thing. When you first get your iPad or your iPhone or something and you think to yourself, I wonder if I can draw on this thing, then you start looking around. Maybe you go to the Apple Store, you type in the word sketch and you find, Sketch Club, Sketchbook, Sketch Your Mother, all kinds of apps, and you start trying them out. So if you're anything like me, you'll try a few different ones. You'll open them up, you'll find the pencil tool, or in this case the sketchy tool, or whatever, and you'll just, start messing around with it a little bit. What's on the screen right now is my first Sketch Club sketch. When I first got the program, I was very pencil oriented. I had spent most of my drawing time with pencils, doing pencil sketches, and I just threw this together and uploaded it, because there it was. Yes, of course, Sketch Your Mother. What, you never heard of that app? It's very popular. Anyway, I uploaded this guy. And, a little while later there was a comment on it, and I was immediately hooked by the whole concept of the community embedded right in the art application. But I was approaching, like most people do, with certain mindset. The idea of how to draw was based on my previous experience with pencil and a piece of paper. And so I tried to use the iPad, use Sketch Club, as if it was, sort of a strange pencil and paper. And because of that, I encountered quite a bit of frustration. And I think most of us encounter some kind of frustration when we first try to work on a touch screen for a number of different reasons. One is that we're coming at it from the wrong perspective. This is not pencil and paper, and does not work like pencil and paper. And if we try to do it as if it was, it's sort of like going from a tricycle to a Maserati. We just don't have the context, and we don't understand the tool, so we're probably not going to do too well. That's not to say that we can't use iPad, Sketch Club, iPhone as a replacement for an ordinary paper sketch pad, but it's really not the same. And in fact, it's so far beyond the ordinary sketch pad that we'd really be limiting ourselves if that's how we thought about it. And so over the past year or so that I've had Sketch Club, I have slowly gotten it through my head that this is not pencil and paper, that this is different, and that I should think of it different, and that it requires really a different skill set to use properly. But once you start getting your mind around what it can do, it opens up a huge world of possibilities to you as an artist, as a tool for growth as an artist, and for producing artwork right in your hand. Anyway, not to belabor the point, but I think you get what I'm talking about. So this first picture, the one we're looking at here, the last dust bunny, that was my first attempt. That was my little sketch. You can see it's very much like a pencil sketch. Now let me show you a sketch I did the other day. This also is a sketch, similar to the one that we'll be doing today as I show you some of my ideas and thought processes. Just a sketch, but more than a pencil sketch, obviously, because Sketch Club is way more than pencil and paper. Now I use a stylus when I draw on the screen here, because I find it easier than pencil. Easier than my fingertip. But the truth is that the iPad screen isn't really designed specifically for drawing. It's intended to recognize something about the size of your fingertip, and so its accuracy isn't the same as, say, the sharp point of a pencil. The other thing is that you can't lay the side of your hand on the screen, because that messes things up. And at first I found that very annoying. I tried different things like gloves with the fingers cut out and what have you. But over time I've learned to hold my hand in a different way over the screen. And really, when you think about it, if you watch someone painting on an easel with a paintbrush, they don't rest their hand on it. If you watch someone in a life drawing class doing gesture drawing with a graphite, they don't rest their hand on it either. Resting your hand on there is something that you do with pencil and paper, but it isn't something that you have to do as an artist using a tool. In other words, what I'm trying to say is it's a skill, something that you can learn. I'd never rest my hand on the screen now. I wouldn't even think of it. I just use a stylus and I hold my hand up, and it's become more natural over time. Anyway, enough talking. Let me start doing some drawing here and show you a little bit of what I mean. Maybe I can illustrate it since we have this program right in front of us to illustrate with. Alright, so we have a nice blank screen here, and let's just take it from the perspective of, okay, this is pencil and paper. And we'll grab a brush here. The brush I've grabbed there is the pencil brush Black Pawn created, and it's up there. You can download it yourself, and it gives a pretty nice approximation of a pencil. So I'll show you a little bit of the kind of sketching that I might have done on a pencil and paper, and then we'll take it from there. So when you have a pencil and paper, you're limited. All you can make are dark marks. You can't make any light marks. And so as a result, the paper, being white, is the brightest color that you can produce. And everything you do with the pencil makes darker. And so you learn how to work from light to dark, and every mark that you make is for shading or shadowing or outlining. So I might draw out, sort of a three-dimensional object like this, and then I would want to shade it in some way, and I would use lines, cross-hatching, that kind of thing to shade it. And this would be the kind of thing that I used to goof around with, just toying around with 3D shapes, shading them, cross-hatching them. It was a way to get started with pencil sketching, turning things into three-dimensional objects. Alright, so here we here we have little robot boy, or whatever he is. Just a little sketched out character, just to show you that you can actually use this in a similar way to pencil and paper. But of course you're limiting yourself quite a bit if you do so. So let's look at some of the other tools that we might use to draw something similar to this. So if I was going to approach sketching that same little robot character, but not using lines, not using a pencil type of brush, I have to change my thinking. Instead of thinking in terms of lines, I start thinking in terms of shapes and forms and shadows. And I can produce a very similar kind of drawing of, pretty much the same kind of thing, but in a different way, with a different thought process. So I've chosen a somewhat fuzzy brush. I'm going to set it to 100% opacity and a fair size, and then I'm going to start drawing on here. For now, we'll keep it all just gray tones. No colors yet, just so we can get our mind wrapped around what we're trying to do here. So we'll take this brush, we'll take a slightly lighter color than the background. You see I've set the background to a middle gray, because now, since I have Sketch Club, I have the opportunity to work both from light to dark and dark to light. In other words, I can put down marks that are lighter than the paper, I can put down marks that are darker than the paper, and I can control the whole range of values much more easily than I can with a pencil. Okay, so now what I've done is it's messy. It's a sketch. I've sketched out that same basic shape of the block head and the little stem that he's sitting on there, using just light and dark and this kind of a messy brush. Now I can go back in and I can clean this up and play with it to make it a little bit more smooth. The reason I start with a fuzzy brush is because I just like it better. You can also use a smooth brush, but I find that when I do, I tend to make less interesting sketches. So this is an alternate method of sketching. In other words, you don't use lines, you use full-blown shapes, planes, shadows, forms, and you think in terms of the whole three-dimensional object and how the shadows would fall on it. And one of the big advantages that we have here, since we have control over the entire range of values from black to white, is we can restrict how bright we've made things. Like, I've made the eyes there not quite white, which leaves me still some room for further highlights. If I put highlights in the eyes now and I use full white, you'll see what I mean. Alright, so there we have, in about the same amount of time, a sketch done using different tools rather than thinking in terms of lines, pencil and paper, thinking in terms of shapes and forms. Now we'll go a little further and let's look at some of the other things the tool can do for us. Now that I have this guy's shape here and his little face, I can do some experimentation because I are a digital artist now. I don't have to limit myself to what a pencil or a paper can do. I've chosen a layer above the layer on which my guy is drawn, and I've set the layer to the mode color. And now I'm going to choose just the regular smooth round brush, and I'm going to put color on this guy and show you what happens to the underlying picture as I draw over the top of it, paint over the top of it with colors. I'm using, again, 100% opacity on the color layer and on the brush that I'm using. So now you can see, as I put the color on top using the color mode of the layer, the color mode, it automatically picks up the lightness and darkness that I've already specified in my underlying black and white layer. I didn't have to make the red darker on the side or lighter on the other side. It automatically happened because it's blending. The mode blend does that for you. That's what I'm talking about, learning the tool and using it to your advantage. It's kind of interesting. So do you see what I'm talking about? How it automatically gets darker or lighter as I draw over the top of it, even though I'm just using one color. I'm not changing the color, I'm not making it lighter or darker. Because I'm using the color mode, it automatically picks up the lightness and darkness of what's underneath it without me having to do anything special. It's just one of those interesting little factoids that you can find out about blending modes and using layers that makes it a more interesting tool to use. So there we've colored him in, and we haven't destroyed anything. We haven't actually colored over it. The original drawing is still there. So now, if I decide I don't like the color that I've made him, I'm not limited here. I haven't locked myself in. That's one of the nicest things about using digital media, is that you don't have to lock yourself in. If you're doing a pencil sketch and you make a mistake, you don't like some part of it, you've got to erase, and you got to redo it. Yeah, with this, you're less limited. You can do things non-destructively. So there we are. Now I changed him to green just to see how he would look, because it only takes a few seconds. There's our pencil guy. I mean, he's still cute. And we could, of course, color him in. And here's our painted version. Alright, so I'll stop for a minute for questions. Anyone have questions so far? Okay, anyway, I probably belabored that more than it needed to be, but let's go on to actually do some other, we'll actually do a little sketch, the way that I might sketch something out, and in the process we'll look at some more of the tools, we'll look at some of the other techniques that I use to make things, you know, I don't know, just some of the techniques I use, and we'll just have some fun with it. Alright? Okay, so these days, this is something I've been trying to do more and more of, because I find that it gets me into a different thought mode. It seems to sort of invigorate my artistic vision in a way that I think just because it's different than what I've always done. First, I bring up a new canvas, and then I set the background to some kind of darker gray, and I start there. And then I get out my fuzzy brush. This is just one of the standard Sketch Club brushes. It's not a custom-made brush. Fuzzy brush. And we'll start sketching a little bit and see where it goes. Yay! I hope you are enjoying it. I mean, I love this program. It's done so much for me personally. I just want to try to share with you some of the ideas I have and some of the thoughts. Hopefully they'll help you in your journey, because all of us are on a journey. I could probably share with you a little more about my personal journey, but I think we'll leave that for another time. I didn't start drawing until I was an adult. And actually there is one other thing I wanted to touch on, which is the concept of talent. What is a talented person versus a non-talented person? Because I think the word talent is often misused. A lot of times you'll see someone in a comment or whatever on someone's post say, "Wow, you really have a lot of talent." But what they really mean is, "Wow, you really have a lot of skill." And skill and talent are not the same, and I think this is an important thing to remember as for each of us as growing artists. Talent, to my way of thinking, talent is sort of an affinity for learning the skill. Someone who is very talented will learn the skill more quickly than someone who is not so talented. But either of them, given enough time, can gain the same skill level. And this is important to realize as for each of us as we try to learn how to do these things. Now for me personally, and this has been a point of frustration for many years, I am not extremely talented in art. It takes me forever to learn stuff. Considering how many years I've been drawing, I should be a whole lot better. And it frustrates me sometimes to see, a 20-year-old kid, what I consider a kid, who has so much more skill than I have. And in fact, at one point in my life, I got frustrated enough that I stopped drawing altogether. And looking back on it now, I wish I had not. Because if I had kept at it, my skill would have continued to grow, maybe not as quickly as Joe Schmo over here, the great artist, but it would have gotten a lot better. And so I would be better now, and I would be more happy with my current skill level. So I just want to put that out as an encouragement to all of you. Regardless of how quickly you learn, if you apply yourself and continue, you will learn and you will get better. And eventually, anybody can reach master status. It just might take some a little longer than others. But in the end, someone viewing the artwork, they won't be able to tell the difference. That's my pep talk for the day. Now let's go on with our drawing here and sketch out this little guy, whatever he's going to be. Looks like some sort of animal. So what I'm doing here now is just sketching away, screwing around a little bit, trying some basic cartoony, this is going to be a very cartoony kind of guy. And, basically blocking out the forms, getting the places that I want things to be. Then my next step, I'll start using a little bit darker and lighter grays. I'll use the lighter where I want things to come out, to look like they're popping out of the canvas, and I use the darker colors where I want to push them back into the canvas. So you see I'm sketching just like I would with pencil or paper, but I'm using larger. I can do a whole section of gray at once, which makes it kind of different. My thought process is different, but it's still really the same. And what's fun with it is that I just kind of I can pick the color that's already there using I use the tap color picker where you hold it down for a minute and it picks that color from the screen. And then I can lighten it or darken it, and I'm not worried yet about colors because I'm just doing a grayscale guy here. Now, I haven't used anything but 100% opacity so far. So there's my little grayscale creature, whatever he is, little doggy. And if you were in my last class, you remember I told you about how important edges are in terms of your perception of the character of the shape. Whatever the edge looks like, your mind will fill in the rest of the shape as being that same thing. So if I make the edges look fuzzy, they do look kind of fuzzy on this guy already, then he'll look fuzzy. I mean, all of them will look fuzzy. So let's use one of the tools that we have at our disposal here in Sketch Club, something you could never do with pencil, and smudge. Smudge is fun. So what I'm going to do for smudging is Journey. I can sing some Journey. I can for smudge, there's a brush that I uploaded from my last class. It's called Hair, and it's basically just a bunch of little dots. And I'm going to pick that to use for my smudge, and then we'll smudge the edge of this guy to make him look more furry. Now the smudge brush that I have here is a little bit different than the one in the release version, but you can do it still with the release version as well. And of course this version will be out pretty soon. So let's smudgeify this guy. Maybe that's what we'll call him, Mr. Smudgy. So you can see that just by that little bit of smudgifying around the edges, now he looks like he's a furry creature rather than just a fuzzy creature. So we can of course play with it more and more, and we will as we go along here. So I just wanted to show you the effect that the edge has. Alright, so what I'm doing there now is I used that same brush, the one that's called hair, and used it in the normal way, and used various colors of gray. Started, with dark, light, a little darker, a little lighter, and a little darker, a little lighter. Keep going over it to make him look a little hair. We give him a little bit of a top knot here. A little bit of fuzzy on top. Alright, there we go. That's probably good enough for the moment. So we now have our little fuzzy guy with some hair on top of his head. So let me save that and then see if there's any questions before I go on from here. Alright then, let's go on. Let's smooth him out a little bit. What I'll do at this stage is I want to increase the contrast that I have a little bit. Make sure that I have, a deeper range for him, and then smooth him out a little bit. So I'm going to go to the layer menu and use the filter, and we'll give him just a little more contrast. And turned out that he didn't need very much, because if I put it very much, he was turning all black. So he's pretty good. Then I'm also going to darken the background a little more, because I think the background needs to be a little darker for him to pop out. Then on top of that, I'm going to use the regular soft round brush, and I'll smooth out around the eyes and what have you, make him a little more presentable. Poor Mr. Smudgy. This is the first time so far in this particular drawing that I'm starting to use less than full opacity. I'll adjust the opacity as I go, just depending on how it feels to me as I use it, because I want to smooth him out a bit. Now what you'll see me doing here with this soft brush is I sample the colors, the grayscales that are already on the screen, and I use those. And since I'm using less than full opacity, they then blend into the surrounding areas pretty easily. It's an easy way to blend. Just pick the colors from there, from either side, light or dark, and blend them on top of each other. That's another one of the things that you can't do with a piece of paper. Zoom in for the details so you can get them nice and clean. I don't want to have his eyes look fuzzy, so that's why I'm going around and cleaning up the fuzziness around the eyes a little bit. Because fuzzy eyes, that'd just be wrong. Unless you're doing an alien. I guess if you're doing an alien, you could have fuzzy eyes. This is the fuzzy-eyed alien from planet Fuznoid. Yeah. There's definitely a planet named Fuznoid. There has to be. Alright, so now we have this stage of the drawing. He's cleaning up for what we're doing now. You can obviously spend a lot more time with the details and cleaning it up, making it whatever you wanted to make it. But we'll stop there so we can go on to what I would consider the next stage. So I had put the smooth brush stuff on a layer above. I'm going to actually merge it down, so we're back to just 2 layers again. So now we're going to color this guy. Now I told you already earlier in the class about the color blend mode of a layer. So let's start there. We may not wind up using it, but let's start there. So I'll go to the layer above. The layer above, set it to color mode, and now I'll use the soft round brush, and I'm going to throw some colors on top of this guy to just sort of get a concept of what he might look like. And then we'll talk about some of the different modes that you can use for this same purpose. Color is just one of them. So this is the color mode over. I'm not trying to limit it to anything that's underneath or anything like that. I'm just doing a rough general coloring. So 100% opacity, it's kind of a brown color, although it comes out more orange because of the way that it blends with the underlying layer. The brush itself is set to its normal mode over. I went in and erased a little bit where I had accidentally colored over the white parts of the eyes and what have you, and the nose. I don't want those to be brown. So now let's try some of the other layer modes so you can see the difference that the effects will have on the color and the appearance of our little guy here. So now this is the same exact layer. I haven't changed anything. I just changed the mode to overlay instead of color. Overlay will give you a much closer approximation of the color that you're laying down, because it's doing an overlay instead of just changing colors. It's just a different blend mode, so it blends differently with the underlying layer. This gives him more of a brown appearance. Usually with overlay it tends to be a little darker. As far as keeping the color from going outside the edge, you just have to be careful not to go outside the edge. There's nothing preventing me from going outside the edge. And in fact, if you look, you can see that I have gone outside the edge, and I've also not gone all the way up to the edge. I would have to clean that up manually. There's no quick fix for that. Alright, so yeah, you still have to be careful around the edges on your own. But it's just one of those things. You gotta be careful. You zoom in and you use your eraser. You may use a smaller brush till you get the edges right. I'm not gonna worry too much about the edges right here, right now. We'll get there. How do I handle glass and metal? I let someone else do them. I'm not very good at glass and metal, I must admit. But I will look into it. Maybe I can figure out how to do it and have a class on it in the future. For now, let's go forward with some of these blend modes. So we've tried the color mode and the overlay mode. This is the darken mode. Completely useless for what we're trying to do here, but it's always interesting to try the modes just to see what they will do. This is lighten. Again, not too useful here maybe, although it's kind of an interesting effect. It's definitely not what I want. We'll talk more about dodge later, but this is how it looks with a color layer on top of it. Kind of bizarre. Burn. Burn has specific uses. This is not one of them. Now soft light gives us sort of a softer, lighter brown. It's not as intense as the other. I don't usually use soft light for a color layer, but you might. It depends on what you like. Hard light. Very similar in this case to overlay, since we have very little changes in the actual color. The color layer right now is all just one color, but still might be useful. He looks nice and brown. This is the Martian version. This is difference. Difference actually does some sort of mathematical calculation and takes the difference between the color that's underneath and the color you've put on top. Now, one thing I do find this useful for is I can very easily see now where my color is going over the edge or not quite up to the edge. So I could take an eraser and fix the edges a little bit, because this mode is showing me them very clearly. I'm not going to clean it up too much because I don't want to spend the time here in class. So let's look at another blending mode. This is the exclusion mode, which again is not too useful for this. I do use it fairly often, but I use it in a different way. Maybe I'll get around to showing you that later. This is hue. It has absolutely no effect in this case because the underlying layer doesn't have any colors. So color plus no color doesn't do anything. This is the saturation mode. It doesn't make sense here either, but it is kind of bizarre if you wanted a red puppy. Saturation, normally what it does is you want to put like levels of gray on top of it in order to increase or decrease the saturation of the underlying color layer. So we're using it completely backwards here with color over gray. It doesn't really work. And now we're back to color where we started, and there's only one more really, and that's luminosity. And luminosity is intended for you to be able to basically fix places in the underlying layer where it was too bright or too dark. You can change it by putting a layer over and adjusting it. But since our overlying layer here is all one color, that's what happens. All one color. You get one grayscale. Very boring. So I think we'll go back to the color mode and we'll use that for this guy. I also like the overlay, but I don't know, I'm sort of liking the oranginess of him, so we'll do that. Alright, any questions at this point? I know I went through those layer modes really fast. Not all of them make sense in every situation, so we can certainly talk more about them. Okay, so moving on, we're going to use another blend mode. In this case, we're going to use multiply. Now, multiply is a mode that I use a lot, mostly for shadowing, and that's what we're going to do it now. So let's take another layer above this one and we'll set it to multiply. Okay, so I have a layer above all the other layers. I have set it to multiply somewhere around the 30% opacity on the layer itself. And now I'm going to put in some shadows using that. And the way I'll do that, I could use a brush, but I'm going to use the vector tool because I like the way that I can make shapes with it. And I'm going to set it to 100% opacity, and I'm going to use a pure black, as the darkest black I can get. I'm using the default settings for the vector tool. 100% opacity, fill is on, gradient is off, and simplify is set to 1. Now this has resulted in some kind of horrifying, very sharp looking shadows. So now what I'm going to do is blur the edges. And the quickest way to do that is to use the layer filter called blur. So that's what we'll do. And now blur has smoothed out the edges a little bit, made it a little less harsh. And now I can play around a little bit with just how dark it is by changing the opacity on the multiply layer. Just depends on the the look that I decide I want, how dark I want it to be. Now I'll probably go back into the multiply layer with the soft round brush, and I'll fix it up a little bit. I might do a little erasing, just kind of smooth out the shadows a little bit, give them a little bit more of a three-dimensional appearance. I just generally use multiply for shadows. It has a slightly different effect on the layer underneath than normal does. It depends a little bit on what's under it, exactly how it looks, but I find that multiply gives me, I guess, a convincing looking shadow. That's why I use it. You can, of course, use multiply with colors, and they will affect the colors underneath in different ways. But that's just something you'll have to experiment with. Alright, now I'm reasonably happy with the shadows. Again, you can certainly spend a lot more time on the shadows and on the whole thing than we're doing here. But I want to just show you the basic techniques so you can have some idea of the tools at your disposal. Any questions from there? Yeah, I agree, Wendy. Math and art. I just kind of ignore the math and go with what my eyes see. Try the modes, play around with them, see what they do for you. But multiply is one that I use a lot because it makes a very easy way to do shadows. If you want to get really fancy, you can use a cool color against a warm color. So for your multiply layer, you might use a blue, since this is an orange guy. I won't do that, but it does make an interesting looking shadow rather than using black. So that's just another thing in the back of your mind when you're doing something. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge all this down back into one layer again. So I have just the one layer to deal with, and I'm going to then go around and use my smudge brush to fix up his edges a little bit again so that he looks fuzzy, sufficiently fuzzy. And that had the additional benefit of fixing all the edges where I didn't quite get the color right. I cheated. Alright, so now we have this guy here. So he doesn't have that many colors to him. Maybe we might want to add other colors to him. I won't do that now, but you could certainly think about other colors that you might add in here. We'll leave them for now. Let's move on to the next layer. This is the part that I call lighting them up, because so far we've used shadows, but we haven't put any light on them. We're going to light him up now. Any questions before I go to the lighting up stage? Alright, before we light him up, let's change the background color. The background layer is still separate, so we can change the color of it. See if we can find one that brings him out a little bit, because the gray is good for getting started, but it isn't very interesting. What I'm gonna do there is just use color fill, and I'll move it around, see how it looks, move it around some more, see how it looks. Alright, I guess I decided on a sort of a darkish green as the basic background color, and now we'll make it a little more interesting by doing some kind of a gradient with it. There's several ways to do gradients. You can use the vector tool. There's also the Pastor Bob version, which I think is what we'll do here. I'll show you what I mean. So I've put another layer above my background layer. I'm going to pick the big fuzzy, not fuzzy, just ordinary round smooth brush, a lighter color of green, and I'm going to make a splotch. Let me turn off the layer that has the Mr. Smudgy on it, just so you can see what I'm doing. So I made a smudge a little with the brush, just there it is. And now we're going to use the transform tool to make it bigger and move it around a little bit. And we'll turn our guy back on so we can see how it affects the front, because that's what we care about, is what's in front. That's the poor man's radial gradient. Thank you, Pastor Bob, for showing us how to do that. I'm probably going to add another color just to make it a little bit more interesting yet. So this is just to add a little interest to the background. You know, one color flat background is kind of boring, so we add a little bit to it. Just for now, that's enough. Now we'll go back to what I was going to do, which was light him up. Let's do that next. Yeah, it is. It's great for all kinds of background skies, anything like that. Now I've merged that all down onto a single background layer, so we're back to 2 layers again. We're not using too many layers in this one. Now I'm going to make use another layer above the guy, and I'm going to set it to multiply again. This time I'm going to do something else. I'm going to fill the layer entirely with black. So now, this is what Mr. Smudgy looks like in a completely dark room. Because the opacity is 100%. That's too much. I'm going to reduce the opacity of the layer to about 50% or thereabouts. Alright, so now he looks like he's in somewhat of a dim room. There's not a lot of light in there. And now I'm going to take an eraser, and I'm going to erase the parts where I want the light to shine on him. This is sort of a reverse way of doing lighting. So we've darkened it first, and then we erase wherever he's going to be lighter, where the light hits him. Now the thing to remember in your drawing or your painting is that in order for something to look bright, it has to be something else that looks dark. So that's why I darkened the whole thing and then lightened up one side of his face a little bit. Again, increasing the amount of three-dimensional effect here. There's more light on one side and darker on the other side, but we haven't lost any of the shading that we did before. It's still all part of the picture. And now we'll do one step further in this lighting process. Alright, so now I've added another layer above. This time I've set it to dodge, and I've set it again to full black. So it's filled with black and it's set to dodge. A completely black dodge layer has no effect, so that's why we're not seeing anything yet. So now I'm going to draw in a relatively dark gray, but not black. It has to be gray, and the lighter gray, the more effect it'll have. That's why I start with a darker one. And I will additionally add some more lights. Any place that I draw this gray is going to light up some more, because dodge will light it up. So let's get a brush. This is the soft round brush again, and opacity at 40% or something, and a fairly darkish gray. And I'm going to paint on top of this guy now with that on the dodge layer. So we go around, we lighten parts up. Let me show you the effect by turning the layers on and off, so you get an idea of what we've accomplished with these guys. This is just the normal layer, nothing. This is how he looks with the multiplier layer on, where we've erased some parts that we wanted to be lighter. We can still adjust the opacity of these to adjust how much they affect it. And then that's the dodge layer. You can see how it almost looks like someone turned on a light over in the next room. Okay, so there's our 4 layers so far. We've got a background layer, a normal layer, a multiply layer on top of that, and a dodge layer on top of that. Any questions so far? Alright, well, I'm going to move on then. The dodge highlighting people's hair, that's interesting. You should mention that because that's what we're going to do here. What I'm going to do is on my dodge layer, using my hairbrush, the same one that I used to create the hair in the first place, I'm going to draw with a light colored, or darkish gray, I guess, over top. And right on our dodge layer to give the hair some more highlights and make it more shiny. There you go. You have to be a little careful about how much of that you use, but you can make it look pretty shiny using that dodge technique. Might have to change his name to Mr. Shiny. Alright, so now let's play around a little bit with the eyes, because the eyes are kind of flat and dead right now. The least we have to do is add a highlight to them. I will add the highlight on a layer above everything so that none of the underlying multiplies or dodges or anything has an effect. I might put it under the dodge layer. But I'm just going to use pure white. This is the only place in the whole painting that I will use pure white, is for the highlight on the eye. There we go. I wish I had made the the whites of the eye a little darker, but we'll live with it for now. And maybe a little bit of this same sort of thing on the nose. Okay, now I don't want to spend too much more time. We've been here 2 hours now, so let me do a little bit with the background, and then I'll show you the finishing moves, what I call finishing moves, before I finalize this guy. So I'm going to grab another layer, put it above the background layer, and I'm just going to use some kind of pattern brushes and do something back there, just to make it a little more interesting than it is. You can use lighten to get a similar result, although it isn't exactly the same. Lighten will not generally change the color, whereas dodge will. Dodge will make it turn, in this case, like more toward yellow. Also, dodge is easier to overdo, where it becomes insane. It looks a little bit more, I think, like light shining on something and reflecting than light does. But lighten is also useful. Alright, I added a few little sparkles by drawing on the dodge layer. You can see how it goes right over him. Alright, so we'll call that good enough for now. Let's save this, and then we will merge everything down to the bottommost layer using the merge all command. Now we've merged everything down to a single layer, and we're going to use some of the filters on it. I'll experiment a little bit. Probably use a little saturation first. Increase the saturation will make the colors a little more bright. So there's a little bit of extra saturation, just kind of brightens them up a little bit. And then I'm going to play maybe with vibrance a little bit, see what that does for us. And he's already vibrant enough, I guess. Vibrance doesn't do much. So let's try, let's mess around a little bit with the shadows highlights just to see if I want to make him any darker or not. I'm not sure about that. And I decided that increasing the shadow darkness does not help, so I won't do that. And he's looking actually reasonably good here. So we'll save him as he is. And now what I'm going to do is use the transform tool on the entire layer and move it around a little bit, cut off some of that bottom edge that I never did paint, and just sort of change a little bit how he's sitting in the frame, crop the edges a little bit that way. Also gives you a preview of the cool new transform tool, which is awesome. And there we go. We'll call that finished for today. Save that out, sign your name on it, and call it Mr. Smudgy. Any more questions before I go? Alright, so I hope what you got out of it was the concept of just going at it like as a sketch, you know, getting in there with the brush, start making some shapes, you know, don't necessarily approach it anything like you would with a pencil, and just let the tool do all the things it can do for you. Add colors, shininess, all background colors, brushes, fuzziness, smudges. You have all these tools at your disposal, and there's no reason not to use them. I mean, there they are. Let's have fun.